Welcome back to the course titled Qualitative Research Methods. My name is Aradhana Malik and I'm helping you with this course. And we have been discussing critical theory. We discussed what critical theory was. Now we will move on to the characteristics of critical theory. This lecture will be focusing on the characteristics of critical theory. Okay, so the foundation of critical theory, and I'm going to read a paragraph from an article by Kinchlow and McLaren that was part of the Handbook of Qualitative Research Methods by Denson and Lincoln. As Einstein and Heisenberg pointed out long ago, what we see is not what we see, but what we perceive. What we perceive, what we make out of that situation. The knowledge that the world yields has to be interpreted by men and women who are a part of that world. What we call information always involves an act of human judgment. So what we are interpreting is based on our judgment of that situation. The knowledge that we gain from the world has to be interpreted by men and women, by people who are a part of that world. So what is true, what is real is always going to be relative. It is going to be dependent on the person who is coming up or who is giving us the interpretation, who is giving us the notion of real and true. From a critical perspective, this act of judgment is an interpretive act. The interpretation of theory, critical analysts contend, involves understanding the relationship between the particular and the whole, and between the subject and object of analysis. Again, this is being repeated time and again, that critical theory is focusing on the relationship between the subject and the object, the observer and the observed. So the interpretation of theory involves understanding this relationship between the observer and the observed, and how this relationship defines the quality of inquiry that is being conducted, or how it defines or how it determines what is taken out of the inquiry, or what is understood from the inquiry that is conducted. Characteristics of critical theory. The first characteristic, again, this is a paper by Guba and Lincoln in the Handbook of Qualitative Research Methods edited by Denson and Lincoln. So I'll give you the complete reference. Ontology, or what is studied or believed. In this case, it is historical realism, challenging contextually and reflexively realized meanings of historical facts and truths. So when we talk about critical theory, we are talking about accepting that phenomena, that the knowledge that has been found to be real and true has been arrived at through a reflexive process, through a process of going back and forth, through a process of challenging the context or challenging the reasons for using the reasoning that was used, or challenging challenging the process of arriving at the meaning that has been arrived at historically, and and accepting that the process was thorough and complete. Historical realism, what is studied, the phenomenon, we have to draw a line somewhere, so I'm going to study phenomenon A. So my understanding of phenomenon A, its current state or its current understanding has been derived historically through this going back and forth between ideas, and a real definition, a more widely accepted understanding of what is going to be studied has already been arrived at. So that is the ontology, that is how we define what we study or what we believe. Then epistemology, why and how do we know what we know? That is epistemology. So epistemology in this case is transactional and subjectivist. I know what I know because enough conversation has taken place about it. Transactions interaction regarding the object of study has happened and it has been subjectively interpreted. What can be known is inextricably intertwined with the interaction between a particular investigator and a particular object or group. In saying so, we are bringing to the fore that the characteristics of the investigator and the characteristics of the investigated are both contributing to how the interaction between the investigator and the investigated take place, to how the interaction between the observer and the observed takes place. Okay. Then methodology. Methodology is dialogic and dialectical. There is dialogue and discussion to uncover and excavate those forms of historical and subjugated knowledges that point to experiences of suffering, conflict and collective struggle, to link the notion of historical understanding to elements of critique and hope. Why would we challenge something that is believed to be true? Only when we find something wrong with it, something is not right, something still needs to be probed further. So critical theory typically deals with subjects of oppression in the or subjects of unfairness. Putting it very, very crudely, very simply, critical theory questions phenomena that surface as being unfair, and for the sole purpose of finding out why this unfairness even happened, for the purpose of finding out where this unfairness came from, and redrafting, recreating that understanding in such a way that this unfairness evolves to a message of hope. So the methodology here is dialogic. A dialogue takes place between the observer and the observed, and dialectical, a discussion takes place on opposing values with the sole idea of arriving at a meaning that is going to be beneficial, that is going to help alleviate the current situation or the interpretation of the current situation, so it becomes comfortable. I am putting this very, very simply, and it's quite likely that people may disagree with what I am saying, but that is the way I understand this. The inquirer is cast in the role of instigator and facilitator, implying that the inquirer understands a priori what transformations are needed. So we are talking about critical theory, we are talking about uprooting the held beliefs of what is right, what is wrong, what is acceptable, what is not acceptable, how things should and should not be done, in the hope that the person uprooting these notions, with the assumption that the person uprooting these notions understands what to do after these notions have been uprooted. So that is the underlying assumption. The inquirer is cast into the role of the instigator. One, you are poking and prodding and you are saying why this, why not that, why this, why this, why this, why is, why are, my student, one of my students asked me a question yesterday and she said, ma'am, whenever we are referring to a child, I was giving them some example of how children learn to socialize in new environments, and I used that example to describe how organizations evolve. And she said, ma'am, you used the example and you said, you referred to the child as she, whereas in most literature, children are referred to as he. Why is this? Can this be a subject of inquiry? Has this already been a subject of inquiry? And I was quite intrigued and I was quite impressed by this girl, because she wanted to know, ma'am, why? Why are we doing this? There's another student who asked me that it is a common notion, common understanding that in all these forms that we need to fill up for whenever we have to give out personal information, for some weird odd reason the marital status of a woman needs to be listed. It is either Miss or Mrs., but the marital status of men never needs to be revealed on all of these forms. So is this and both of these students asked me if these kinds of discourses or these kinds of behaviors were indicative of a patriarchal society. You see the amount of insight our students have into these issues. So questioning why, and both of these questions were asked by women. Both the students who asked me these things were women. They were not men. So it is hurting them personally somewhere. Somewhere something is striking a chord. And I'm not saying that all men are going to be unfair, but asking why these systems developed, why these systems took the shape they did, is the method we use when we use critical theory, when we talk about critical theory. So what are all these rooted in? What are the historical backgrounds that these are rooted in? Somebody is suffering, somebody is uncomfortable, somebody sees that something is unfair, and an inquiry from the paradigm of critical theory would essentially necessitate that some action be taken after one has found out why these things happen. Okay. So the inquirer is then cast into the role of instigator. So the inquirer is poking and prodding. Why? Why do we have to write down Miss, Mrs. but not Mr. or married Mr., etc. And facilitator, I will find out why this is happening, and if I cannot discover any logical reason for why a woman's marital status needs to be revealed on the form for or on the travel documents, on the passport, on the documents that one has to fill out, on the hospital forms, wherever. So once I've found that out, if I can't find a logical reason for it, I will share this understanding with somebody who can do something about it. So facilitator, first you find out and then you facilitate the evolution of the knowledge base. You facilitate an addition to the way things are done in such a way that whatever was seeming as unfair doesn't seem unfair anymore. So we change things. But who would know more? Who would know more? The inquirer or the observed? That is the criticism of this. Who is going to know more about the situation and the transformations that are required in the situation? Would it be a person who is conducting an inquiry into it, or would it be a person who is actually going through it? And this was a topic of discussion in the course that I taught through the MOOC portal before this, and that was sustainable development. Who knows more about what kind of development is required? The people in the situation or the people coming with fancy expertise from outside the situation? Who is going to know more? Okay. How does knowledge accumulate? In critical theory, knowledge grows and changes through a dialectical process of historical revision that continuously erodes ignorance and misapprehensions and enlarges more informed insights. In one of the previous lectures, I told you that when we conduct qualitative research, when we add knowledge to the knowledge base, the knowledge that is added is found to be or is perceived to be complete. The addition of knowledge is perceived to be complete only when the boundary between the new knowledge and the old knowledge starts getting blurred. You don't know where what you knew ended and what you have just added to this knowledge base has started. So when the new knowledge becomes an integral part of the old knowledge base, then only then can we understand it to be meaningful and or worth our time or worth being probed into. So when we say how does knowledge accumulate, knowledge accumulates by way of adding to the existing knowledge base in such a way that these lines between the old and new are blurred, by fitting into the old knowledge base in such a way that it seems like an extension of the existing knowledge base, through historical revision, through ensuring that ignorance does not find a place in this inquiry, through culling out the misapprehensions, through enlarging the currently formed insights. Generalizability, when we talk about knowledge accumulation, generalizability, our ability to generalize, is a function of similarity across the complexity of contexts. So we don't say that, okay, what is true in this situation will be true in the other situation, unless we can draw parallels between the complexity of contexts that the situation that is being observed in, the phenomenon that is being observed in, has with whatever we are comparing it to. We cannot say that these two phenomena are generalizable. So generalizability becomes a function of the similarity between the complexity of contexts. The criteria for judging the goodness or quality of inquiry are: number one, the historical situatedness of the inquiry. What was happening before it? How will it be connected to what will come after it? Where is it situated historically within the ongoing dynamic milieu of things? The second aspect that helps us judge the goodness or the quality of inquiry is the call to action by the inquiry. So we are not inquiring into something for the sake of inquiring into it. We want to do something about it. I want to find out why the marital status of women finds a place on all these forms, but the marital state of men does not, for the purpose of either adding that column or removing the Mrs. tab from the forms, so that unmarried, separated, divorced women do not feel uncomfortable, and a sense of fairness is achieved in the social fabric that we are a part of. So unless I have that in mind, maybe it is not, it will, whatever I am trying to study will not have much of meaning, will not have value. It will have meaning, it will just not be considered valuable in the scheme of things. Okay, so I am finding out something for the purpose of doing something about it, and we call this action research. We conduct research for the purpose of adding to the society that it can, or adding to the situation, to the context it can be applied to. So call to action by the inquiry to facilitate or stimulate the transformation of the existing structure. We want to find out something so we can transform the structure that we are trying to inquire into for the betterment of all involved. Role of values in inquiry. Values become a part of inquiry from a critical theory perspective, from a critical, within the critical theory paradigm. Values become very, very important, and excluding the role of values becomes harmful to the interests of the powerless and of at-risk audiences. So values shape the way the inquiry is conducted. What is good, what should be done, what is required to be done for the betterment of the human condition becomes a guiding factor in the way the inquiry is conducted. Place of ethics in the inquiry. There is a moral tilt that the inquirer be revelatory in the rigorous meaning of fully informed consent rather than deceptive. We are not trying to deceive anyone. We inform the inquired that they are being inquired into. We inform the observed that they are being observed. And we base our inquiry, the methods are based on a fully informed consent. We tell them that we are going to be observing them, and only when they say yes, you can observe us, do we go into the situation and observe whoever it is that we are trying to observe. these considerations do not prevent unethical behavior, but they do provide some process barriers that make unethical behavior more difficult. So, when we lay everything out in black and white, the chances of us becoming unethical or indulging in unethical behavior are considerably reduced. So, we try our best to be as clear, as transparent as possible. So, there is ethics becomes a guiding force for the inquiry. Values that are held by the inquirer and the inquired also shape the way the inquiry and the way the inquiry takes place. Role of voice. The inquirer's voice is that of the transformative individual, intellectual, who has expanded consciousness and so is in a position to confront ignorance and misapprehensions. So, the voice, the mindset that the inquirer brings to the table is a transformative mindset. I am going in, I will find out more about this situation and I will do something about it so that the human condition is alleviated, human condition becomes better. The condition of all the human beings involved in the situation becomes better, fairer, more bearable, etc. Who has expanded consciousness and so is in a position to confront ignorance and misapprehensions. So, the inquirer, when we say voice, we are talking about the role the inquirer has. The inquirer has the role of going in as a person who is willing to acknowledge misapprehensions, who has the courage to confront ignorance and say this is where one needs to know more before arriving at a decision, before coming to, or before arriving at, or before deriving a meaning from this situation, and who has expanded consciousness, who's open to ideas, who's open to receiving different perspectives and combining these perspectives and then helping develop a more thorough, more in-depth understanding of the phenomenon that is being studied. Change is facilitated as individuals develop greater insight into the existing state of affairs, the nature and extent of their exploitation, and are stimulated to act on it. So, the inquired are also made aware of their situation, they are helped to accept their situation, and their action in coming out of that difficult situation is facilitated by the inquirer. And that is the voice that the inquirer has. I am here to help you. I will understand. I am coming with an open mind. I would like to understand what is going on. I have the courage to point out what is unfair, what should and should not be done. I also have the knowledge, a thorough understanding to be able to point out what should and should not be done, and I am in a position to facilitate your coming out of that situation, or your making that situation better for yourself. Okay, so that is the voice of the inquirer. Now, what are the implications of critical theory? The implications for training of novice inquirers in critical theory. Critical theory is very difficult. We are talking about challenging everything, we are talking about breaking everything, we are talking about reconstructing everything. But what do we need to know? What do we need to have in order to really conduct inquiry from a critical perspective? The first thing and the most important thing that we need to have is thorough training in and understanding of both qualitative and quantitative methods. We need to know what we are dealing with. We need to know what is out there, not only qualitative research, we also need to fully, thoroughly understand, clearly understand quantitative methods, because till we know what's out there, we can't question it. Okay, so we need to have a thorough understanding of it and in-depth training in it. thorough understanding of different paradigms of qualitative research. Critical theory is the last stage where we say, okay, this is not right, this is not right, this is not right. This needs to be changed and here is why. This needs to be changed and here is why. But till we know what exists and how it shapes things and how it shapes the mindsets of people and why and where the gaps are, how will we question it? So, in order to question something, we first need to have a thorough understanding of it. We need to understand the mindsets that inquirers bring to the table. We need to understand the mindsets that different people are coming with, that different people are working in, and only then can we say, okay, this may be looked at in this manner. Then the development of a keen interest in and the grounds for questioning what exists. So, one has to be thoroughly involved in the research one is conducting, one has to be thoroughly involved in the process of inquiry. One cannot go in from the perspective of a disinterested inquirer. One has to be thoroughly involved, entangled with what is being inquired, and one has to have the courage to face up to things that one feels can be changed and question them. So, it is courage, it is knowledge, it is the energy, all of these things have to come together. Only then can one really and truly approach anything from the critical standpoint. So, I think that is all we have time for in this lecture. In the next lecture, we will wrap up the discussion on critical theory. Thank you very much for listening.